All right. It is time. It says it's recording, but I don't see it going anywhere. Interesting. Anyway, it's time now that we're into chapter 3 of Palo to get introduced to a couple artists because we're doing different mediums, and I want you to have a chance to start to see how I tie it to the artist investigation and how even though I'm leading them through something or I may be creating something that is somewhat not open-ended, like in terms of we're looking at a specific artist, the process is the exploration that will occur, not something that looks like something the artist did per se. So let's start out, actually, let's start with Horace Pippin. Um, because there are amazing children's books now. Um, really, there's been in the last 10 years, just like an explosion of amazing stories of artists. In my discussion post for chapter 3, I really started to talk about anti-bias education, and it just kind of came to me a couple semesters ago that one of the best ways that we could really teach children about the diverse people that are in our world would and still like explore the arts would be through beautiful children's books, which are also working on literacy, and talking about what their identity is and how they became an artist, and talking about their families and where they live, the things that like kind of create our identity. So this is a book about Horace Pippin, and it's called A Splash of Red: The Life and Art of Horace Pippin. This is written by Jen Bryant. It's illustrated by Melissa Sweet, and it's a Robert Siebert Honor Book, which means that it's won a couple different awards. One thing I would talk about, I'm also going to talk about, but I might be talking about it specifically in a different place, is how when we do a read aloud, how we are exposing children to concepts of print that will help them have an easier time as they build their literacy skills. So with young children, I might say, hey, what colors do you see on this cover? And then I might say, well, we're going to talk about color. We're going to explore color. But Horace Pippin has something about red, and this is red, R-E-D, in a pre-K room where they are going to be most likely learning how to spell their name. I might say, is there anybody here that has an R in their name? And I might kind of point that out. It also, of course, is always a matter of how much attention span do we have. So that's always a thing. This book has a beautiful book cover. Under the book cover is also, it's actually the same. On the back, it says, pictures come to my mind and I tell my heart to go ahead. In the end cover, which is what this end page, I think it's called, the colors are simple, such as brown, amber, yellow, black, white, and green. So in Horace's painting, they've listed what colors there are. And then we have this thing of red, and the bird is red. That's interesting. I wonder why Horace seems to do that in this illustration. And the name of the book is Splash of Red. Okay. So, A Splash of Red, The Life and Art of Horace Pippin. And look, there's a lion and a lamb. Okay, happy birthday, George. It looks like Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, like a little bit of a map. And he lived over here in Westchester. This is on the date of February 22nd, 1888. And it says, Welcome, Horace. I think maybe he just got to Philadelphia. Let's find out. On February 12th, 1888, the town of Westchester, Pennsylvania celebrated a holiday. That day, in the same town, Daniel and Christine Pippin celebrated the birth of their son Horace. Okay. We could talk about, although it would take forever, right? Well, does anybody else when's everybody else's birthday, etc. Horace grew fast, so fast that his mother could barely keep up with mending. He'll be a giant someday, the neighbors would say. Grandma Pippin smiled at Horace's long legs and big hands. She figured the neighbors were right. Grandma's hands were big too, rough and scarred from her slave days in Virginia. But they were just fine for giving Horace hugs. The biggest part of you, she told him, is inside where no one can see. And might point out that this is like the inside of a tree. And I wonder if that has something to do with the art Horace makes. When Horace was 3 years old, the Pippins moved to Goshen, New York. As the family grew larger, everyone helped out. Horace put his big hands to work. He fetched flour for his mother. He sorted laundry with his sisters. He played with his baby brother. He held the horse while the driver delivered milk. I love how the curtains on each window are super colorful. And then you can see the laundry line. Very cool. At night, he piled wood for the stove and arranged dominoes so his grandmother could play. Then, if he could find a scrap of paper and a piece of coal, he drew pictures of what he'd seen that day. Horace loved to draw. He loved the feel of the charcoal as it slid across the floor. He loved looking at something in the room and making it come alive in front of him. He loved thinking about a friend or a pet, then drawing them from a picture in his mind. So part of Horace's process, it sounds like, can be a still life, looking at something in the room, but that also sometimes he pictures it in his head. Maybe he incubates it. At school, he sat quietly at his desk, but his big hands were always busy. Make a picture for us, Horace, his classmates said, and Horace did. His pictures made people happy, except when he made some next to his spelling list. That made the teacher mad. I don't like that teacher already. I think she's taken herself entirely too seriously. She doesn't realize that illustrations are important to reading. I don't know. So then if we look here, we have a hen, a dog, a stove, a tree, a star, a dishpan, a book, a fish. It's too bad she didn't instead embrace his skills and be like, wow, you really made those really do look like those things. I can't do that. Pictures just come to my mind and I tell my heart to go ahead. Well, Horace just couldn't stop drawing no matter how mad the teacher got. One day, Horace saw a funny face in a magazine. Draw me and win a prize, it said underneath. Horace drew the face and sent it off. I mean, that looks like you could trace it. Interesting. A few weeks later, a package arrived, and inside, Horace found colored pencils, a pair of brushes, and a box of paints. Congratulations, said the note. Horace had won his first real art supplies. Paint a picture for us, Horace, his sisters cried. And Horace did. He painted every day, scenes in natural colors, and then he added a splash of red. So it's interesting. It sounds like he always adds a little bit of red. All right. So now we've got some different materials here. We've got the color pencils, which are not expensive. We can get those at the dollar store. We got some paint brushes. Right now those look like my watercolors, but I don't know that they are. Horace was in 8th grade when his father left for good. Boo. The family needed money, so Horace quit school and went to work. Now, I might not say the boo if I was reading this with kids, right? But it might also be interesting to talk about the fact that the father left. Sometimes children feel like they're the only ones who don't have a father living in the house. Depending on the identity of the children in your classroom, the families that they have, it might be a time to be like, oh, well, his family now, even though he has a dad, his dad isn't going to live with them. Can make that be like okay for children so they're not always feeling othered. For several years, Horace's big hands were always busy, stacking grain sacks at a feed store, shoveling coal at a rail yard, mending fences on a farm, carrying luggage at a hotel, making brakes in an iron factory. I suddenly feel like my childhood was much easier. Packing oil paints into wooden crates. Looking at these made Horace remember winning the art contest and how proud he'd been, how he loved those colored pencils, those brushes, and his first real box of paints. But I guess when his father left, he had to become the man of the house. So Horace was a big man now with big responsibilities. Still, he loved drawing as much as he always had, and he used charcoal, broken pencils, whatever he could find. Make a picture for us, the other worker said, and Horace did. So Horace is one of the early artists that uses found materials because he doesn't have money to buy supplies like other people might, or like the ones he won. And we have a map, and I think children's books and the stories of others in our when we're sharing like artists or different people from history are a great way to show them like a globe or a map to really show that we live in a much bigger world than where we are right now in this classroom. So this is starting to talk about a war. Far across the ocean, a terrible war had begun, and Horace's big heart wanted to help. The good old USA was in trouble with Germany, and he joined the army and sailed away. What's nice here is that that's written in a way that is fine for children to hear, but it can be the first time that we start that schema of history about war with another country. In France, Horace and his regiment dug deep trenches for protection. There were no blankets or beds. It was always wet and dark and cold. And he writes, it must have been like a journal. I have not seen the sun in more than a month. I have not seen the sun in more than a month, Horace wrote. He wrapped his big hands around a rifle. Planes droned overhead. Shells exploded. Gunfire rattled through the night. If the fighting stopped for a while, Horace put down his gun and picked up a pencil. Make a picture for us, Horace, his soldier friends pleaded. And Horace did, and he filled his notebooks one by one. I think the other thing that this story starts to talk about is how art is therapeutic. He's living through a really hard time, and drawing is a way for him to deal with fear, with having a hard time, being cold and dark, and that's an important thing to remember. And it says the war brought out all the art in me. So it can also help you process things that you're struggling with. One day he climbed to the top of the trench and a shout rang out. Horace felt pain in his shoulder. He was hit. Many hours passed before help came. Horace was glad to be alive, but the bullet had badly damaged his right arm. When it healed, he couldn't lift or move it the way he used to. Now, when someone said, make a picture for us, Horace, he could not. After the war, Horace came back to the United States and met Jenny Wade. Jenny was a hard worker. She loved to cook. Horace was a hard worker too, and he loved to eat. It was a good match. They married and settled down in Westchester. And this is November 20th, 1920. So we've gone a few years here, right? Horace and Jenny Pippin. I can never forget suffering, and I will never forget sunset. I came home with all of it in my mind. Horace was 32 years old, as big and as strong as ever, but because of his injured arm, he couldn't find a job. How much can you lift? The hiring boss said, and that was the end of that. So Horace did what he could. He organized a Boy Scout troop. He hired baseball games. He took the neighbors' children fishing. And when Jenny started a laundry business, Horace delivered clean clothes. As he walked along the streets of Westchester, his fingers itched to draw all the colors and textures he saw. Lacy white curtains billowing in his windows, a splash of red geraniums blooming on a step, a yellow cat sprinting down an alley, deep green vines spiraling up a wall. At night, his old home in Goshen, his grandmother's slave days, and the Bible stories she told made pictures in his mind. And he longed to draw them too, but how? His right arm was weak and painful to lift. What's interesting is he's drawing in his mind. And a big clue to being able to have good reading comprehension is visualizing reading in your mind. So it's important for fantasy play, but it's also, this is important, this incubation of ideas, thinking in your mind of what you want to do, to draw, is something that can help later with comprehension and literacy. So the iron poker stood by the fire straight and tall as a soldier could. What's he gonna do with a hot poker? And there's wood. I don't know. So with his left hand, he grasped his right wrist and he thrust the poker into flames until it glowed red hot. So we're not gonna do this in the classroom, clearly. Using his good arm to move the hurt one, he scorched lines into wood. Make a picture for us, Horace, the neighbor said, and Horace did. So now maybe he can't afford art supplies, but there's wood near his house and he can use wood. And if he's using an iron poker so that he can make these etchings, he's a pretty smart guy. Now, the other thing you could talk with children about is, have you ever tried to draw, like, which hand do you usually use? Let's try to use the other one and see, like, this is hard. He's like reteaching himself. With practice, his arm grew stronger, his hand steadier. Maybe now, he told Jenny, I can try painting. There was no money for art supplies, so Horace used an old brush and then leftover house paint he found in the alleys. For a canvas, he used a clean piece of cloth. So again, these found materials, as we move through the other chapter, one or two of them that we're going to do a palo, you'll see these found materials because money's an issue. And we want to recycle things and not one and done, right? Become really critical. Like, why are we not using things that we already own or we already have that maybe how many of us buy paint for a house or our families do, and then we only use half a can and then they just sit around and don't get used. That's silly, that's wasteful. So every day and late into the night, Horace worked on his painting. He used gray, black, and white, the somber colors of war. Here and there, he added a splash of red. Here, they're introducing this idea that these colors, kind of like Palo did in the beginning, what kinds of feelings do you associate with these colors? Um, they're starting to do that with Horace's thing. Are you going to stop and talk about each one of these things? No. But we know children love to rehear stories, and they get more and more out of it the more times they hear it. So every time they do this story, you can focus on something different. Or if someone shows interest in something or they're curious about something, you can go in that direction. If a man knows nothing but hard times, he will paint them, for he must be true to himself. Again, this therapeutic idea of art and being able to capture your experiences through painting. It's not unlike journaling or poems that are art that are written to process feelings of sadness or happiness or despair or whatever. He used 100 layers of paint. He decorated the frame with tiny sculptures, and 3 years later he finished. So this is a person who does that incubation and does layers. So yeah, I did do paintings with my daughter, but I didn't go back. He would keep painting, which makes them have more depth, I assume, even if you're covering things you already did. Now, as he delivered laundry or fished in the river, new ideas came, but he didn't paint them right away. Before he reached for a brush, Horace planned each new scene in his head. So, if we're teaching children about process, we would want to talk about what's Horace's process, because it's not just sit down and paint whatever. Although he did do that a little bit when he was a child, he talked about painting what was in the room. But he also talked about even then that he liked to think about ideas he had and picture them and then try to bring them to life in a painting. He painted the milkman and his wagon, women working in the kitchen, children playing games in the yard, cotton fields and log cabins, John Brown and Abraham Lincoln, war scenes and Bible tales, men singing on I want to say, I was going to say Comet, it's Corner. And then we have the shoe store. Horace hung his paintings in a shoe store window, $5 each. Can you imagine? He hung others in a restaurant and even traded one for a haircut. People admired Horace's paintings, but no one bought them. Then the president of a local artist club saw Horace's pictures and he told his friend, the famous painter N.C. Wyeth, to come to see them too. Wyeth agreed. Horace's paintings were good, very good. Do you have more? The men asked. Horace showed them his work. He held his breath as they looked and talked. Finally, they said you should have your own art show, a one-man exhibition right here in Westchester. Horace could hardly believe it. He shook hands with the men, and when they left, he celebrated with Jenny. It is some of the purest expression I have seen in a long time. These are comments about his art. People came from all around to see Horace's paintings. Magazines wrote articles, reporters took photos, an art dealer told Horace he could help him sell his work. More than 40 years had passed since Horace won his first box of paints. Now, at last, everyone knew he was an artist. I love this idea of this gallery too. I think we could make this gallery look in our classroom to show the children's work, to show if you're introducing an artist to children, you could get posters or prints from online. Um, to have a little gallery of the artist, kind of like in the home living, like in our dramatic play. Um, so Horace became famous. His paintings hung in big city galleries, museums displayed them, collectors admired them, movie stars bought them, and once again, Horace's big hands were always busy. Artist show wins acclaim. London to see Pippin painting. Pippin has them talking. A brush with greatness, drawing from the heart. And if you stood outside his house late at night, you might see him leaning towards his easel, his left hand holding up his right, painting the pictures in his mind. And here's a picture, a photo of Horace Pippin. Um, so one thing I want us to think about, there's a lot of great notes in here, and if you were doing Horace Pippin, I might have you read them. And we might go back to it as we work on different parts of our artist investigation. There is that map I talked about in the end page, kind of, I think it's showing where his art might be displayed. It says places where you can see Horace, it's like Horace's art, and then there's a few pictures of it, right? And then it's a way for them to kind of see all the different state names. We're learning a lot here. Now, in terms of identity, we can learn about Horace's family, that he's brown, that he lived, they were from what, Goshen, New York? Or did he move to Goshen, New York? We can talk about his mother and how they made a living and different things about him. Just showing who he is and what made him Horace and who Jenny was, right? So that's one way. And Horace is, he perseveres through a lot. I mean, it only mentions slavery just a little bit, but also if you look at the things that he had to do as a child, it might be interesting to at least drop the idea. Did it, did any of you have to do that today? Did you have to go deliver the milk or whatever, or go get the milk? Hold the horses while the milk is delivered. Like these are different times. There's different ways to be have transportation, different ways to make money. Um, and have some of those conversations that really talk about the different people and from who come from different places and have different backgrounds. And then it's kind of cool to see how his art ends up kind of like, first of all, the map is all over the United States, but some of those headlines we're talking about how people in other countries wanted to see his art. So it can really show the children how big the world is, just for a little bit, just for a minute. So that's the story of Horace. I'm going to stop here and then I'll do a new video for our next book. Thank you.